2030 meeting to discuss the OCAP parking garage issue. I'd like to just introduce Aaron Clancy, who's helped us with the effort. I know a lot of you are familiar with Grove 2030. Those of you who are not,
I don't know if that's going to work.
all right,
I think you got to screen
closer. So anyway, just to introduce myself, Dave Volano from the Grove 2030 Initiative. And to those of you who are not familiar, I know a lot of you participated in the project over the past year and a half or so. But those of you who are not, just to let you know, the Grove 2030 is a community-based strategic planning initiative. And we've been meeting for the past year and a half or so, and we're at a point right now where we've adopted a set of strategic goals that we're now trying to flesh out into an action plan. And one of the key areas, of course, is transportation. And a number of our members from our group over the past week or so have been asking the question how the sale of the parking garage fits into our strategic goals. There was also some questions from the merchant community who have their own set of ideas for moving the Grove forward towards the vision that we've articulated. And so they started asking a lot of questions that we couldn't answer readily. So we put this meeting together to invite Art Noriega from Miami Parking Authority, who's here. And we also have a representative from Terra Group, who's the purchaser. I think it's Victor Diaz, the attorney for the Terra Group. Is he here? Is Victor here? There he is, okay. David Martin would be here. He's not in town, unfortunately. So as a format, we're going to allow Art some time just to present his proposal, the reason why the sale has been recommended to his board and why the board has approved the sale. And then we're going to, before any questions are asked, then we're going to provide Mr. Diaz, on behalf of the Terra Group, the purchaser, an opportunity to present some information they have. And at that point, we'll open up to questions and answers from those two individuals. Fair enough? All right.
Thanks, Dave. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Art Noriega. I'm the CEO of the Miami Parking Authority. I've been in this job almost 16 years. I've been involved in the Grove probably for a better part of a little over 20 years. So my engagement in the Grove in general has been pretty extensive. I think pretty much practically for almost every innovation we've had as an organization, probably some way, shape, or form started with birth somewhere in the Grove. And so I have a intimate, long tenured relationship with the Grove, and I know that over the course of that time, what happens typically in a lot of these situations, especially when there's a major decision like we're engaged in now with the sale of the garage, there tends to be pretty consistently a lot of misinformation or just not enough information that gets to the public. So Dave invited me. I was happy to get the invitation and had to work some stuff from my calendar to be here too. Unfortunately, David Martin couldn't be there. But I was happy to be here, first and foremost, to kind of tie in and give you a little perspective on why and what the intent long-term, what the long-term plan for the Grove for us is. But he also gave me the benefit of giving me a copy of the Grove 2030 plan. And it outlines, obviously, a set of specific goals. Now, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the plan in detail. But what I'd like to first start by doing is saying, you know, without referencing the plan, right, just having seen it at first glance, and knowing what we plan on doing, and what our future plan in the next 2 to 3 years is for the Grove, it's almost a perfect marriage. And I'm going to go point by point with some of the strategic planning initiatives that specifically the Transportation Committee of that committee has outlined. And I want to talk specifically to those and how the sale of the garage sort of benefits the Grove. How many of you are familiar? Can I get a show of hands with the plan? Okay, good. Okay, so I'm speaking to a pretty well-informed group. Let me give you a little historical perspective first. That garage, the Oak Avenue garage, when it was built in the late 90s, was built using portion of the proceeds to build the garage came from what was then the Parking Trust Fund. Parking Trust Fund exists, but under a different format. It's managed by the Coconut Grove Bid now. And so we built the garage with the retail as really a plan to sort of create an interceptor garage, really along the fringe. Time CocoWalk and Mayfair were really in sort of that infancy stage. And since its inception, it's really been an underperforming garage. So it's been a garage that for us, unfortunately, never materialized in terms of the type of utilization that we hoped. Part of that was because what in essence happened was we had all this parking sort of amassed in this one particular area of the Grove, and we had almost no parking in other areas of the Grove, and what inherently happens is people don't want to walk, right? So that area became underutilized for us. CocoWalk isn't even remotely close to full, neither is even Mayfair now when it's been repurposed, and that garage hasn't been since the day we built it. So what happened was, we were sort of having a discussion, I was having a discussion with David about this idea of how to handle some of his parking, the relocation of the Coconut Grove Bank employees, whatnot, during the construction. And that sort of evolved and morphed into a discussion of, well, would you be interested in selling the garage? Now, I never thought there was a market for the garage. I mean, if you looked at it from a performance standpoint, a utilization occupancy standpoint, it doesn't sound like it was really worth much. But we also were knee-deep in the development stage for a couple of big projects, right? The Grove Bay project, which is the garage we're building on Bayshore, the Coconut Grove Playhouse. We have phase 2 of the parking for Regatta Park. So after a little bit of discussion, it sort of occurred to me, we may have an opportunity here, because we may have an opportunity to take an asset and leverage that asset to build not only more inventory, but then it also occurred to me, and I went to Manny at the bid, and I said, Manny, you know, the bid or the trust fund initially invested in this garage, it would be great to give the bid back that money. I knew we had a couple of big projects sort of queued up for the bid, more particularly projects that were going to handle a lot of the infrastructure, and I'll speak specifically to how they tie into the strategic plan. But there was this whole initiative and a whole series of projects that really, I thought, could benefit obviously from the money and from a reinvestment or return on that money. One thing government never does, and so to give you a little more perspective on that, I work for a public entity that's we'll call it quasi-independent, right? We have a lot of accountability in the City Commission, but we have an independence too. I have my own board of directors I report to, and because of our independence, because of that sort of arm's length, we get to make decisions sometimes that elected officials or government bureaucrats aren't willing to make, right? So it got me thinking, you know, one of the things we never do in government, when government gives out money, it never expects to get that money in return, right? Government gives grants, gives tax rebates, gives TIF money allocations, and never expects to get the money back, right? They always figure that's a lost contribution. And I had a conversation, ironically, about 8 months ago with the county mayor with regards to the Miami World Center project. And I said, you know, this developer's coming to you and asking you for a contribution, a TIF contribution. And I said, why don't you look at it like an investor looks at that contribution, right? Instead of giving it to them as a grant, why don't you give it to them almost from the perspective of how an investor would, right? If they were going to the capital market and saying, hey, I need $40 million, that investor would expect a return, right? Once you give them that $40 million, you don't have an opportunity to re-leverage that money ever again. It's lost. It's something with the project. In this particular case, I said, Manny, this is an opportunity for you to take an initial investment, which built a building, get it back, and now you get to re-leverage it again to new projects. Right? So you get to use that money 2, maybe 3 times over down the road. We thought it was a good idea. So I went to David and I said, look, David, we have a process. It's a solicitation process called unsolicited proposals. Send me a letter of interest. I'll take it to my board and we'll vet it and determine whether or not it's something that we feel is appropriate to do. So I went out and did an appraisal. Got David to submit a letter. He did. It was a substantial offer, and I said, you know, this makes a lot of sense. Because when I started doing the math, I said, look, we get to take this resource and reinvest it in the Grove, not have to take on additional debt, by the way, which is good, sound fiscal policy, very prudent. And I get to actually build more parking, enhance the infrastructure in the Grove, right? And this particular garage, this asset, doesn't go away. It stays a parking garage. So, thought about it, petitioned my board, They agreed with the plan. We advertised it. We ultimately got 3 responses. We made a selection, went back to the board again, got the selection of Tara as the recommended respondent, then negotiated agreement, got that approved by my board as well, then went through and sort of vetted it through the bid hierarchy, first to the finance committee, then to the executive committee, then to the full bid board, just to keep them appraised of what we were doing, also to inform them they were getting a substantial amount of money back. And in doing that, we started to sort of put a lot of detail to that plan, how we were going to use the money for the garage. So what we did was we said, okay, we have this $16 million offer. About $900,000 of it has to go back to paying off some debt, very little debt that's on the garage. And the remaining balance, we said, how are we going to allocate the funds back? So I had a conversation with my board chairs here, Tom Joki, and I said, look, if we're going to sell this asset, it's a Grove asset. I don't want to take the money and put it anywhere else. The money needs to go back into Grove. And we have these projects queued up. It's the perfect environment to do it. They agreed, and I said, look, I'm gonna start to really allocate the money. So we identified the Grove Bay project. That's about $5.5 million that we're going to put towards that. We identified phase 2 of the Regatta Park parking plan, which is going to start construction in January. That's about $1.3 million, right? We're giving back a little over $2.3 million to the bid, which they're going to use really on 3 big projects, which is the sidewalk, bike lane, lighting improvements along McFarland, along Main between McFarland and Franklin. They're going to commit money from those resources to the creation of a circulator, because we're going to create a circulator in the Grove. We're going to buy retired trolleys, and we're going to actually create a real circulator in the center Grove. And then we're going to also reallocate money, obviously, to the phase 2 of Regatta Park, and then take the remaining balance and allocate it to the Coconut Grove Playhouse project. Now, the bid, through a prior resolution months earlier, has already committed $3 million to the Playhouse project. So we have now $9 million committed to the Coconut Grove Playhouse project. That's a substantial contribution from where we have been. Look, and I've lived the Coconut Grove Playhouse for that full 20 years, from our early operation of that lot, dealing with the prior nonprofit management of it, to the state taking it back, to now the county getting it, sort of reconstituting the plan. And to finally be where we are now in that project is, I think, a long time coming, but it's in a very short window now. I think we're there. I think the county's already committed substantial resources to it. So have we. And I think that when you look at the opportunity to leverage this parking garage and build what we needed to build throughout the Grove ultimately is getting a multiplier almost 3 times the original investment. I think that's good public policy. That's my own decision. That's my own personal perspective. I believe my board shares it. Certainly the bid board shares it, because we've discussed it at length there as well. And you rarely get an opportunity to do something like this. Rarely do you get an opportunity to actually re-leverage an asset like that and do so in a way that actually expands what we call the infrastructure of a particular neighborhood, right? A neighborhood that, quite frankly, has seen itself in recent terms in a bit of a rebirth. And so we're at the cusp of that rebirth, right? So when Dave gave me the plan, I sort of highlighted 4 key areas, really the areas that really applied. And so one of the key strategic planning goals was to create a pedestrian and bike-friendly pathway linkage. So the sale of the garage obviously perfectly fits into that in terms of the bids plan, because with the creation of that bike path and the completion of the sidewalk improvements and the lighting along Main Highway to McFarland sort of fits perfectly into that, sort of creating a better pedestrian environment. Now the bid's already invested a substantial amount of money in improving the sidewalks. We've been doing that project for the last year and a half. So this is just another phase of that, and all of the proceeds from that are coming from the recommitment to the bid. Another key goal of the Grove 2030 was to reduce traffic by 40%. So it's an interesting dynamic that they see a vision for, which we have the same problem in downtown Brooklyn, right? We have the same problem in Wynwood as well. It's this issue of we're building all of this, we're amassing all this density, and what happens is then you create gridlock at the street level, right? So a big part of our plan, see, I don't consider myself a guy who parks cars anymore. I've been past that probably 2-3 years ago. Now my job and my roles morphed into almost, I've gotten into the transportation business, right? Because one of the issues we have is, I can't keep building parking garages, really, in the core, in the center of the density, and expect people to be able to use them in a year and a half. Because what's going to happen is it's going to frustrate them. It takes me 20 minutes to go 4 city blocks. By the way, I'm just not going to use that parking. I'm not going to come to that area anymore, right? So it's going to have a reverse stimulus problem, right? We're going to build all this inventory, and then we're going to frustrate people and not be able to get them from point A to point B. So the county handles the big transportation issues, but we're doing some stuff internally through how to treat that last mile issue, right? So we get people to a destination. How do we get them moving around? So we have Uber, we have Lyft, we have these unique private venture opportunities that are available to people, but government needs to sort of step up too. So the circulator is a perfect example of that. We've been talking about this for a while. We've tried to get the county to do it without a whole lot of luck, but finally somebody, and we're a part of it, there's some private investment as well, but the initiative is to buy 2 rubber tire trolleys and then fund the circulator. And I think that is a game changer, one, for reducing traffic in the center growth, because the other part of this is we're also building, our plans to build 2 garages that are on the edge, on the periphery, right? So the difference between the problem we have with Oak Avenue, which we built it on the edge and nobody wanted to walk, well now we'll have inventory, people won't have to walk, because they'll be able to get on, hop and ride on the trolley and on circulator and circulate within the center growth, right? It'll alleviate that traffic congestion. That, by the way, when I first got into this job and Cocoa Walk was new and Mayfair was new, Center Grove was crazy. Crazy in terms of traffic. And we're going to have a lot of those same problems again. Third item on their strategic plan, again, dealt with pedestrians and cyclists and creating an environment for that. So you know, there's sort of this, I think, overall desire in the Grove, both within the business community, the homeowners, and the residents, to create an environment that is a little more accommodating to everything but cars, right? I mean, I think people are tired of accommodating cars. They want to sort of accommodate the ability for people to walk, take a bike, use an alternate mode of transportation, whatever that means. If it's a jitney, if it's a, you know, whatever it is, right? Get on a scooter, whatever your preferred mode of moving from point A to point B, without having to jump into your car every time, is I think where people want to eventually end up. The last one I kind of pulled up, and it's an interesting one because one of the key goals was more accessibility to public parks. So when the city came to me and said, look, we're doing Regatta Park, but we don't have the funds to build phase 2 of the parking, which right now when you walk out there, the parking is a mess, right? It's a hazard, it's a liability, it's not very accommodating. The park is beautiful, but everything that surrounds the park is an eyesore. So I said, look, I've got this money that we programmed in from the sale of the garage. The intent was initially was to give it to the bid. I said, we can reprogram that towards the construction of this parking, and it was a project that was imminent. It was going to begin in January. We'll get a resolution from my board. We'll get my board to agree to do that, and obviously pending the sale. But the idea was, let's finish what we started, and the city had never allocated money to do it, right? So that was our opportunity to sort of finish that plan up. And it's a perfect complement to everything we're doing in that immediate area, because it'll not only serve the park, right? It'll also serve City Hall during public meetings. And in some cases, we have this really robust, obviously, use of the boat ramp, right? Which right now we have very limited parking there too. And during peak times, that boat ramp can become a little contentious, to say the least, right? So one of the things we're going to do there is we're going to actually incorporate the ability to actually park trailers on the weekends as overflow for the ramp as well. So we've kind of looked at this a little more globally. We've kind of looked at what the plan is for the Grove in general for us and said, look, you know, if I'm going to be a good steward of a public asset, then I need to look at the overall plan. I need to look at the Grove in its entirety and say, you know, what do I think is the best fit for it? I've got no stake in this other than the fact that I park cars for a living, right? That's my job. So I looked at it from a standpoint of a parking guy, but also as a guy who understands good government. And I have a role in the bid, and I said, look, there's a way to leverage all of this so that there's a lot of wins here. not just one. That's in essence the sort of the backdrop to the plan, why we did it, what was behind it, what the intended uses are. I have a lot more detail to that information when you guys get to the point. It's a Q&A, I know. Victor's going to come up here in a minute, and then I know they want to get to the Q&A afterwards. So at that point, I'm happy to stay here as long as you want, answer any questions you may have. I've had the opportunity in the last 2 or 3 weeks to speak to probably about a dozen people reference this, and almost every time, unfortunately, and part of that's on me, there was just not enough information out there. And I think people weren't as well informed as they should be, and part of this process is to reconcile that. Victor, you want to come up?
Hi everyone, my name is Victor Diaz. I was introduced as an attorney, and I am as an attorney. I am an attorney, but I'm not here as an attorney. I'm here as a spokesperson for David Martin and a spokesperson for Terra. We appreciate your inviting us here. David apologizes that he cannot be here in person. Ellen Shipley, who's with me here tonight, and David have been a part of the 2030 initiative. They've participated in this initiative. Also present with me tonight is Michael Patricia, the Director of Urban Development for Terra. And we welcome this opportunity to talk to the community and engage you in dialogue, constructive dialogue, as well as to share some of the facts. Art's covered a lot of ground. I'm going to try not to repeat much of what Art has said, but I'm going to try to answer the questions that I think you want to hear from the prospective purchaser of this garage. A little bit about myself. I hate to be labeled. I'm a 54-year resident of South Florida. I'm a former chairman of the Historic Preservation Board of Miami Beach. I'm a former vice chairman of Miami Design Preservation League. I'm a former chairman of the City of Miami Beach Planning Board. And for a short while, I never ran, but I was appointed to the City Commission to serve out the term. And as any good appointee would do, I said, I will not run, and if elected, I will not serve. So I'm here to talk. I have a very big responsibility because I'm here to talk for somebody else. And so I'm here to share his thoughts. So rather than speak extemporaneously, forgive me if I look at some notes, because this is what David Martin wanted to say to you personally tonight. David, as you know, is the president of Terra. He was raised in Coconut Grove. He apologizes that he has other commitments today. But he wanted me to thank you for giving us the opportunity to address you tonight. One of the things I think is important for you to know is, from our perspective, thank you. I usually project, no problem, but I'll speak up. From our perspective, the fact that the MPA and the bid have decided to use 100% of the proceeds from the sale of this garage and reinvest it in Coconut Grove, in specific Coconut Grove projects that have been identified by the community as being projects that you value, is as important to us as I believe it is to you. That the money stay in this community and that be used for the right purposes. Because we are major stakeholders in this community. We are developing major projects in this community, and the success of those projects is dependent on the success of your vision, which is a sustainable Coconut Grove 2030. Now, I know the very first question that you all want me to answer, and I'm going to anticipate it, and I'll wait for it to be asked, is what are your plans for the garage? What are you planning on doing with it? Well, first of all, in the immediate short term, there will be no change in the garage at all. It will continue to be operated as it is operated, with all of the garage spaces and exclusively as 4 stories of garage and 1 story of retail. We have existing retail tenants in that building. We have engaged the adjoining property owners in conversations. That garage is currently being utilized by many local businesses, including the Coconut Grove Bank, who's been displaced during the development of the Park Grove. Long term, we are studying the redevelopment of the garage. And what Terra has publicly announced, there are no plans submitted. These are studies that have been done, but we're not going to not tell you what we're planning on doing with the garage. The idea is to, first and foremost, let me dispel this misinformation. The building is not going to be demolished, and the garage use is not going to be eliminated. I think that's very important, and that is our intention. What we are going to do is resurface the exterior appearance of the garage to create a much more architecturally appealing and aesthetic treatment. There will be eliminating one floor of parking, and they will be adding commercial office space to the building on top. The plans provide for 300 parking spaces to remain at that location. Now, that's not required by zoning. That is what Terra's future intended plans are for this particular property. We saw, David saw, this as an opportunity to create something that is consistent with your Grove 2030 vision. And I read it with great interest as someone who's been engaged in community planning for a very long time. Having this type of office space in close proximity to the new inventory of residential that is being created is intended to promote live-work opportunities for Grove residents and the new residents that will be entering the Grove. There are many people like myself who walk to work. My offices are on Miami Beach, 1 block away from the condominium where I live. That's where my law office is. And I can tell you that I placed my law firm there because I had the ability to get free of a car and walk the 1 block from my home to my office. And that's consistent with the Grove 2030 vision, which I read with great interest, of creating an economically self-sustaining community with a symbiotic balance of office, retail, commercial, residential, and other uses. So the retail is going to be there, the parking is going to be there, and we will be adding office spaces, which we think, we hear, is much needed. And certainly that's what we're hearing from the new residents and from the current residents that are living in the Grove. We also want to further your stated transportation goals of promoting pedestrian and bike-friendly pathways and alternate means of transportation, and to reduce automobile traffic in the Grove. That is why, and this was all part of the discussion in Art's vision and part of the process, that's why the proceeds from the sale of this garage are helping to fund the Coconut Grove trolley circulator. And I think it's important for you to know that the money that's going back to the bid is being leveraged by additional dollars committed by the bid, as Art mentioned. And the Coconut Grove trolley is receiving significant amount of a $6 million earmarked by the bid for 4 projects. And I'm going to talk about those projects during the course of it. But consistent with that is not only the circulators, but streetscape improvements, not only along Main Avenue, but also along Grand Avenue and McFarland Road, to enhance the pedestrian and biking experience. And I think, lastly, it's important to note that part of our redevelopment plan calls for the addition of something that a lot of people overlook, which is very important when you're talking about a new vision and alternative means of circulation, which is the addition of bicycle racks to the building so people can bike to work and have a place to leave their bike. All consistent with the specific strategic transportation goals of Grove 2030. I think the other question you all have is, okay, fine, so you're leaving the garage use and you're leaving 300 spaces. Are they going to be publicly accessible? And again, I want to emphasize, for the immediate future, they're all going to be publicly accessible. There's going to be no change. They continue to be used primarily today by adjoining property owners, adjoining business owners, and the retail tenants. As long term, we are only eliminating 1 floor of parking. We are maintaining 300 spaces, and on most days, at night and on weekends, all or substantially all of that inventory will be publicly accessible. So the question that I bring in the bid process, or in the contract, we've proffered that we will commit to maintaining 10% of, at least 10% of the inventory of the garage available for transient publicly accessible uses at peak hours. We also are working with the adjoining property owners because they've expressed to us their needs and their desire to continue to be able to park in the garage and their specific needs, and we've engaged the community and the adjoining property owners in conversations. Now, Art talked about how the MPA is taking some of the proceeds, the balance of the proceeds that they're not giving back to the bid to build parking, but he didn't give you the specific number of spaces. The net public space gain from the construction by this is the MPA's decision, but I think it's an important statistic for you to know, is 1,729 additional parking spaces that are going to be built with the proceeds from this garage. Art mentioned that the bid is committed from the proceeds that are being paid back to the bid, and they're leveraging those proceeds, $3 million to the Playhouse, and the MPA is taking from the proceeds of the sale $6 million for a total of $9 million from the sale that will be leveraged to go to the redevelopment of the Coconut Grove Playhouse. I told you how they're also funding phase 2 of the Regatta Park parking improvements. The proceeds are also being used to fund the transportation projects that the bid identified as priority to encourage alternative forms of transportation in Coconut Grove. We think that the proposed development is consistent with the vision of creating an urban fabric where there is less dependency on cars and people can live and work in close proximity to each other. And it was really in response to the people that are buying the projects and looking for close office uses to be able, the type of office uses that are boutique office uses, so that people that are residents in the Grove can also have their offices in the Grove and not have to deal with the circulation traffic every day. Finally, David wanted me to emphasize to you that he personally is committed to the Grove 2030 vision. That is why the projects that he's been involved in have generally developed larger units intended to further your goal of having owner-occupied residences, and larger units intended to encourage and successfully have succeeded in getting many families with children to move back into the Grove that are looking for that kind of non-traditional housing in a condominium setting. At Grove, at Grand Bay, and at Park Grove, consistent with the desire to reduce vehicular traffic, those two projects have developed 900 fewer units than was allowed by permitted zoning. Larger units and fewer units to reduce the vehicular traffic impact that would have resulted necessarily from the allowable zoning. So we're here to answer your questions. I hope I've provided you some factual information that will supplement what you already knew about this project. We're here to engage in a constructive dialogue. I do think that it's worth saying that this has been a public process. We thought, and we have been participating in a public process. There were a number of public MPA hearings. We attended and presented at a number of public bid meetings, and there was, I counted them, several newspaper articles, I have them, that appeared regarding this project long before the current article. From the time when this was first started, I think it's important for you to know the time frame. This started back in February, and the contract was signed in June. And their articles have appeared all through February, April, June, and into the early August, not including the recent flurry of press attention that this project has received. So I hope we've given you some information. I know not everyone's questions have been answered, and I know not everyone is going to be satisfied with the MPA's decision to sell the garage. But I hope that you find that our vision is not one that is completely hostile to what Grove 2030 wants, and that we're really trying to minimize the impact that this project has on the rest of the community and leverage it to further the goals that you promote. And I'm happy to answer questions.
Okay, so just what we want to do just to try to make sure that everybody has an opportunity. Let's try to keep our questions really direct and specific. And I know a lot of people have strong feelings about the issue, and rather than the broader open-ended things, let's try to, as much as possible, ask questions to either one of them who might be able to provide a specific answer, and then let's move on quickly because we have a lot of questions. Yeah.
I'm Hank Sanchez Resnick. I'm with by Coconut Grove. I started by Coconut Grove and I moved to the Grove in 2013. Our goal is to make Coconut Grove truly a model bicycle-friendly community. I'm a little troubled by the fact that you say that you want to minimize the impact of automobiles, which is consistent with the Grove 2030 vision. And by the way, I'm on the Transportation Committee of Grove 2030, but you're adding 1,700 parking spaces. So I'm not going to argue with that. I think there's certainly demand for the parking. You will never find people protesting more parking. But what I'm concerned about is that it's going to be tough to install the bicycle infrastructure, like the bike lane as proposed for Main Highway. That is going to be tough. And we really need Terra Group and the Parking Authority and everybody else to get behind that bike lane and support it, or it's going to fall by the wayside. It's not going to happen. It's going to be a very challenging project. Building parking is not. Nobody's going to protest building parking. But when you come to taking real estate on the street for bicycles, that it gets very argumentative with people. So I hope you're going to support that.
Certainly we support it. We're not the ones building the park. The parking authority is building the park. But I do want to say that the streetscape improvements that you referenced, including the bike lanes, are receiving $2.7 million from the bid. So I think the bid is doing its part to use the proceeds and leverage them to see exactly those kinds of enhancements that you want to make a pedestrian more friendly and bike more friendly experience.
Let's try to go around the room quickly. Yeah.
Hello, my name is Ken Russell.
I've seen your ads.
Yes, thank you. I think there's a couple of concerns. The big concern is something of this size is happening this quickly, and something so important. It raises everyone's concern and suspicion. And I have a couple of questions, because one of the things, we talk about the good things we're gaining from this, whether it's cycling and circulator, trolley, and so many things. I don't want to think that those things are independently possible without this happening. And I feel like it's being sold as, in order to get those good things, this sale is necessary. And I don't think that's the case. I don't think it should be sold that way. But my question is, I have two questions. One, you had mentioned that it would remain public parking, and that was a very key part, because you're going to get a reinvestment in it, you can make more parking, but we keep public parking. Is it in the contract of the sale that it must be kept as public parking to a certain extent? And what rates would they be at? Because right now that garage is a very affordable rate, street level rate garage if you compare it to Mayfair or the others. That's one question. The other question is this project of building at the top a commercial project, which would obviously need parking for the people in that commercial project. You mentioned we'll lose one floor of parking, but if you're building on the top floor, you lose that floor to start with the building, or you're building above the rooftop floor. So you would take away the rooftop floor of parking from public, and everything below that would remain as public parking. Is that what I'm understanding from that
I
project?
think that the term, well, it's not public parking and that it is not publicly owned. And I think that that's what's very important for people to understand. The use of terminology is tricky.
Publicly available.
Publicly accessible is the term. And that's important because when people say public parking, it's owned by the people. And it's regulated at subsidized rates. This is a public garage. They sold the public garage. We could have demolished the building, we could have done anything else. That wasn't the vision that we had, and that wasn't what they wanted to promote. So yes, it will remain publicly accessible. And so, for example, for as long as the building's there.
Is that in the contract? Was my first question.
No, there's nothing in the contract currently. We have actually proffered, working with Art, we've offered to put into the contract the restriction on the peak demand hours. Because there was nothing in either the solicitation for bids when we participated in it and we submitted our bid, and nothing in the contract that requires us to do any of the things that we told you here today, nor anything that required that the MPA or the bid reinvest all the proceeds in the Grove, or that the bid leverage it for additional funds to further your vision of the grove. But to address your concerns, yeah, that's what people ask. Are you willing to make certain commitments? And yeah, I'm being taped. I wouldn't be saying the things I'm saying. Now, you address the parking needs. The zoning requires you to build parking. But we're not buying out the parking like some developers do. We're not paying $6,000 a space and building so many thousand square feet of density and buying out the parking and therefore contributing to the density problem that you guys are concerned about. We're leaving the garage use because it's necessary for the reasons you identified. And everybody here knows to support the retail, which is part of our vision, to support the offices, to support the neighborhood. And if you're going to build 300 spaces and leaving them there, of course you're going to want them to be utilized in nights and during the weekends and during most of the times of the day. As Art said, not us, that garage was underutilization at peak hours until recently.
But you didn't answer the one last part, but the rate, will it go from $5 a day to $5 an hour?
The rate items first. The rate currently is a subsidized rate because it's owned by the parking authority. That clearly is the case. So the rate will be set by, ultimately will be determined by the market. However, immediately short term, that garage is currently substantially committed. And we have committed to the users that are there to maintain it that way. We have to because of the development that's going on around it. In terms of the long-term future of the Grove, I can't tell you in 20, 30, 40, 50 years, because that building's going to be there that long, what the rate is going to be. It'd be irresponsible of me to commit that to you right now. It's going to depend on how successful you are in achieving your goals. I mean, if we continue to be a society that everybody drives a car, and that's the only way we get around, and we don't invest in mass transit, and we don't further the vision that you guys have promoted, then there's no, as Art said, there's no amount of parking that you can build that you build it and they will come. So I think this gentleman's point and the other point is a very fair one. It's about working as a community together to realize that vision, because a car-dependent society is not in the best interest of. That's.
So Ken, let the parking guy answer
Yeah.
the last part of the question. Right? So the from a rate standpoint, so I'll take you citywide. Right, rates are really established by the market demand, because ultimately, even as a public agency, I marry my rates to whatever the market will allow me to charge. Now that garage has been so underutilized. I mean, I'll give you statistics, right? That garage during normal operation, aside from this recent issue we had with the relocation of the bank employees, which was really due to the construction, right? Aside from that one anomaly, right? That garage peak never exceeded 65%. 65%. On weeknights and on the weekends, it drops below 20%. So it has low rates because there's really no demand. So in downtown, in Brickell, as an example, right? From a rate structure, we don't establish, the market isn't established by the public entity. The private sector does, because they control most of the inventory. In most cases, and in this one in particular, we're barely 12% of the whole inventory in that area. That's what this garage accounts for. So we're not a market setter, right? We really just establish rates based on what we think we can accomplish in terms of what the demand will allow us to garner in terms of a rate. Now, but let me tell you, there's an interesting idea here. So we talked about the Grove 2030 plan and how this sort of fits into that, and that traffic congestion issue in downtown and in Brickell, which, by the way, is a perfect symbiotic sort of perspective for what's been sort of identified by Grove 2030. Looking at congested pricing models. You know what the intent of that is? To raise prices during the day, peak demand, to keep people out of the center grove, so that we can, or center areas of the business, so we alleviate traffic, by the way, so that we can actually tell people, look, park in the perimeter. Now, you can't do that till you provide them an option. That's part of what the circulator is all about, right? But ultimately, what you want to do is you want to kind of try to create a pricing model that doesn't really encourage people to want to drive into the center area as much, because then they just create gridlock. So pricing is sort of a dynamic problem, and it fluctuates, goes up and down. It just depends on demand. And in this particular case, it's artificially low because the demand has really not allowed us to raise it any higher.
Hi, Kelly Newman. I'm a local local resident, and the number one problem I see for business owners here is there's no parking with the high rents. I'm happy that you don't want cars, but with million-dollar units coming up, there's going to be a whole lot of Range Rovers running around, and they're going to park, and every family has more than one car. In 2030, that might be a totally different story. So my question, I have two questions. Is there going to be a net increase in parking or a net decrease from this acquisition?
Want me to answer that question?
Yeah, that I have a second part.
Net increase is 720 spaces.
720 net, and that's all publicly accessible.
Correct.
And 10% of that during what hours is going to be available?
Oh, no, that's just that garage. I'm talking about the projects that I don't know if you were here for the first part of my
No, I wasn't.
presentation. Okay, I talked about the projects that we're going to build as a result of the proceeds of this particular sale. And so the net gain after all of those is 720. Now, he can speak specifically to the garage and the future
Yes.
use of it, and that's going to be roughly about 300 spaces.
But 10% of that is going to be available when?
No, the whole 300 is going to be publicly accessible. The question is, what people have asked us is, okay, that's fine, but if it gets filled up, during the peak hours, the times you're talking about, Monday through Friday, can you make some sort of commitment to the public about maintaining a certain number of spaces publicly accessible? And that's what we said, that at least 10% of the inventory. As Art has said, the statistics historically bear out. Now, we don't know what's going to happen with demand. As I said, it depends on the success of your initiatives, but there could be much more than that accessible at any given time.
So let me add to that, because one thing we haven't talked about a lot, and to our architects in the room, they'll concur with this. So in parking, we always evaluate how facilities are used, right? We call it a shared use analysis, right? So when this entire inventory got built, CocoWalk and Mayfair were the same animal. They were a retail environment with restaurants. They peak demand at the same time, nights and the weekends. They had the same exact peak generators, right? Mayfair got repurposed. Mayfair is an office building for the most part, right? So the peak demand for Mayfair occurs at an entirely different time from when CocoWalk and Mayfair go. They actually complement each other now, which they didn't before. So when you look at the overall demand generator for the Grove, Monday through Friday, right, during the business hours, and then at night on the weekends, they're polar opposite, right? And those two big anchors generate those demands at different times. So just to give you a sense, the Grove changing and the repurposing of Mayfair actually helped.
Lucas in the
The
back.
second part of my question,
Yes, yes.
was, I know how the press can change things around. Now, was every procedure followed correctly in terms of the bidding and this process? It made it sound like it was not really.
Yeah, so when you read the Herald, and I'm going to call the Herald out on this because I'll tell you, it was probably about, and I've dealt with a lot of media in the 16 years I've been in this job, and I spent an hour and a half with that reporter. I gave him 2 binders full of information. In fact, our buddy Javier can speak to that because he has the same 2 binders, right? So because he asked me for them. And I shared with him a wealth of information. I walked into the process from the very beginning to where we are now. You know how much of it he used? No. He wrote the story already. So look, we want to believe that what comes through the media is accurate, but it's not. And so was the process followed? Absolutely. It was presented to my board. It's been presented to my board 3 times. I update my board every month. I have a line item on my report, because I have a CEO report, and I update my board every month on it. Right? I've updated the various bid committees on it, and we got 3 submittals. We got 3 proposals. Now, ultimately we made a decision. We went with Tara's proposal. And it was the best one we felt. And so, look, they were all, the difference in price, honestly, between 1 and 2 was a decimal point of a % difference, right? So it's one of those scenarios where, people want to always, by nature, we're skeptics, right? And I know people are supremely skeptical of government, right? My buddy, Mr. Crespo here, is a perfect example, right? Of perfect example of somebody who pulls sort of the wool back behind or peels the onion a little bit, right, on the process. Because people tend to really honestly look at everything at face value, right?
So Lucas in the back, and then right here we have a question, then in your next, your third.
If I can jump in, if anybody wants that book in a PDF format, I have it and I can get it to you.
Me.
If anybody wants it.
Lucas? Yeah.
Lucas Azar, I work in the Deer Grove. Anyways, Mr. Noriega, I have a question for you. Is the money necessary for the sale of this building to do all these other projects that you're talking about? Or wasn't there money allocated already for all?
No, there was no money allocated for any of them. To build Grove Bay and to build the Playhouse, without the proceeds from this, we'd have to borrow money, right? So we'd have to incur debt, issue bonds. If I gave you the option of buying a car without making a car payment, or buying a car and making a car payment, look, it's good fiscal policy. If I can leverage the asset and build something and not take on more debt, and in other words, my net to the bottom line is a bigger resource to the city, because ultimately every single dime we make goes to the city, right? Or I can reinvest it in other projects or other areas, or whatever the case may be. But it allows me the ability to broaden my financial capacity. And you know what? It doesn't take, it's simple math actually. So for me, it was a no-brainer.
But there were plans before that anyways to borrow money to do these things, right?
To some extent, yes and no. I mean, Grove Bay, yeah, Grove Bay probably would have been a project we would have had to have leveraged. But outside of that, no, there wasn't. The Playhouse would have gotten a lot less money allocated towards it if it weren't for this
All
project.
these things and just kind of wing it?
City did. By the way, the city had no plan for parking for phase 2 of Regatta Park. None. By the way, till we stepped up. That thing would still be sitting the way it is now. So yeah, unfortunately, by the way, that's the way it happens in government sometimes. Yeah, it gets winged.
You have a very creative approach in framing this proposal as a giant public service when you're really privatizing a public asset. And all of the things that you've mentioned, you say there were no plans to fund any of the things that are being funded from this.
I didn't say
But-
anything. I said
yeah, you did.
portion of
You
it.
actually did say that.
No.
And we know that that is not the case. And so I'm wondering what the actual use, and why does Terra want to have a parking garage if they're not going to privatize it and make it not, are they in the parking business?
No, we're not in
Or
the
are you
park.
using it for your private clients? And you're only going to make it publicly accessible for a very short window of time, and then quietly phase it into a private parking?
No, first of all, why Terra is not in the parking business. The decision to sell this asset and the rationale for selling it, you've just heard from the agency that sold it. We're the acquiring entity. Now, this was a bid process, and there were several bidders. The other ones did not necessarily have the vision of committing to the garage usage. There were no restrictions. The building could have been demolished. The garage could have disappeared entirely. And I guess the uproar would have been greater. And it was a public process. I counted that, when I first was asked to come in here and speak for David, I've been on that side of the chair. And I consider myself someone that believes in good urban planning and transparency. And so I went online and I looked at the MPA's agendas, and I looked at the bids agendas, and I saw 6 MPA meetings in which this project was discussed. I saw 5 bid meetings where this project, 3 bid meetings where this project was discussed, and a time frame between February and the time the contract was signed where numerous articles about the sale of this garage appeared. So this, I think first want to address that issue about the public process. Now, the decision to sell the garage, that was not ours. That is the Miami Parking Authority's. And Art has spoken to his rationale. And I also think it's also important. I don't know whether the resources would have been there. Art's emphatic about it. I'm not telling you whether the resources would have been there or not been there. I can tell you what we were told and what we know and the facts as they exist today, which is that 100% of the proceeds from this sale are being reinvested in the growth. That $9 million is going to the park, is going to the Playhouse. That the bid, leveraging the money that we get, that is given back to them by the MPA, not us, by the MPA, from the proceeds, has committed an additional $3 million to the Playhouse. I'm sorry, it's 6 from the MPA and 3 from the bid, for 9. There is $1,500,000 going for the streetscape and bike improvements along McFarland. $1.2 million for the streetscape improvements along Grand and McFarland, including the undergrounding of the FPL utility lines, and then a contribution to the trolley circulator. Art has told you that the rest of the money that he's not giving to the bid, the MPA board has committed to reinvesting in the Grove and the specific projects that he told you about that are going to create a net of whatever, 700 or whatever public parking spaces that he's created. As far as our garage, yes, we could have privatized the entire garage. We could be standing here before you and saying, we're not going to have any public accessibility, like the adjoining property owners, who are private property owners, have done with their private garages. We're not doing that. We're not eliminating the parking. There's a reason why we're leaving 300 parking spaces. Of course, it's in part to sustain the retail, and of course, it's in part to sustain the office. But if the vision that you're trying to realize is successful, of course it's also in part going to be utilized at all times of the day and weekends and evenings by the public.
All right, could you hold just a moment?
Some will be residents and some will be visitors.
Could we hold just a moment while I change batteries? Okay, so you're next, and then Mark after number 2, and then...
Like a little bit.
Okay, thank you.
Well, sir,